They behave kind of like, they're on the debate team, and so they want to score points based on the evidence that they can, pull behind them. Whereas Republicans understand that politics is in large part an emotional activity, and people have emotional responses to candidates. And our current political system is really shaped by the response after Watergate, when voters said, we obviously need to know more about our president than just his views on foreign policy or his position on Social Security, because Watergate wasn't a failure of policy, that was a failure of character. We need to know about the character of the man or the woman that we're going to put in the White House. And the question is, how can you possibly know about someone's character? Well, when Jimmy Carter came along and talked about being born again, when he said, I'll never lie to you, that seemed like a proxy that Americans could use. And so religion has become a proxy, but it's not the only proxy for knowing what somebody's moral foundation is. And I think it's completely rational for voters to want to know about the character of their candidates. Now, it may not be possible for them to truly know that, but I think it helps everybody, and it certainly helps people who are secular or have no faith as well, for us to expand the proxies that you can use to talk about morality and talk about character. We've used just one option that has a very evangelical voice and evangelical language, but it's not the only option available, and that's what we're starting to see this year too. Yeah. No. Okay.
When I talk to younger evangelicals, I hear them expressing concerns about, say, the environment, much more than about emotional marriage, and they're rather mortified by the James Dobson approach. I just wondered if you would like to see the talk of a changing generation, how that affects the electoral map in particular, or how is the subject environment play into changing alignments of concerns.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's a point I forgot to make. It's very helpful. Absolutely, there's a huge generational divide that's growing in the evangelical community. We did a poll for Time about a month ago of under 30 voters. And I feel like I've followed this stuff fairly closely, and I was still surprised. We didn't ask to find out people's religious affiliation, but it's just a question that we ask. And it turned out 35% of Democratic voters under 30 are evangelical, and 35% of independent voters under 30 are evangelical. In addition, the party affiliation is switching in the community as a whole. 4 years ago, 50% of evangelicals were registered Republicans. Now it's 40%. That's still a lot, but that's a 10 percentage point drop in just 3.5 years, which is significant. And as you say, it's been driven by, really, I think people are going to look back and see this as a time that was a sea change in the evangelical community. Just to take one example, Rick Warren, our buddy who Terry McAuliffe has never heard of before, before 2004, before the election, he sent out a blast email to a couple 100,000 pastors, and he said there are 5 non-negotiable issues for evangelicals in this election: abortion, gay marriage, human cloning, stem cell research, and euthanasia. Yes, it's a pretty small group of issues there. I asked him about this last fall, and I couldn't even get the question out before he stopped me and just said that was wrong. That was completely wrong. My eyes have been opened since that election. Not only was it wrong for me to be that political, but he is now one of the leading voices, not just in the evangelical community, but the religious community, on everything from third world poverty to AIDS in Africa, to opposing torture, to sex trafficking and the environment. As you say, Christian college campuses are in many ways more political than secular campuses these days. And those young evangelicals, they're the ones who are emailing me and saying, I'm an evangelical Democrat too, thank you. It's really, I think, an untapped group, and in part because of the Obama's campaign's appeal to youth, they're trending more Democratic this year. And that's the group I'm going to keep an eye on throughout the campaign if he's the nominee, because I think there's a real chance that although many of them are still pro-life, they've really broadened the plate of issues that they care about.
What happened that made that shift?
In part, although it seems improbable, it really was a few key leaders who started talking more openly. I think there were always evangelicals who cared about more than just two hot-button issues, but they didn't have anyone who was a spokesperson, who sounded like them, and who could promote their views. But another big thing has been the exposure of lay evangelicals to third world poverty. I mean, a lot of these campuses, kids are taking spring break trips or January terms, and they're not going to Daytona, they're going to Honduras, or they're going to Africa. And they may go intending to give away Bibles. But once they get there, they see that the needs on the ground are, these people need clean water, these kids need food. And it's very different. You know, when I was growing up in the Baptist church, maybe, you know, every 6 to 8 months, a missionary would come back and show us a slideshow on Sunday night. That was our exposure to other countries. It's very different to see it with your own eyes. And that's happening at campuses, but it's also, there's a move away from permanent missionaries who go out in the field for 20 or 30 years, much more to lay missionaries of all ages who go out for a few weeks or a few months, and they cannot deny when they get back that there are issues that they feel we have a responsibility to address, not just, and this has been a big dividing line, not just through private charity, but that the scale with which government is equipped to address these problems makes it very hard to say, well, this should just be a private response, and the government has no need to get involved here.
You mentioned about leveling. What would you suggest in terms of how to go about engaging conversation with the religious political left? If you could name 3 easy steps.
Well, it depends what you mean by that. If you mean kind of the traditional conservative religious leaders,
or friends and relatives.
Friends and relatives is a different issue. Some of it is talking about the limits of the Republican Party, which we've come to see over the last few years, and that has led, I think, to a lot of frustration by conservative religious voters. And some of it is simply talking about, as I've kind of discussed, the values behind more progressive or liberal political positions. So much of this, I think, is driven by a feeling that that on the left we strip all of our issues of that they're all value neutral, and that there's no kind of moral reckoning that takes place. I mean, it is a hard and a long process, and there's some people with whom, and I can tell you because I've been on right-wing radio for the last 2 weeks, there's some people with whom this will never prove fruitful. But there are also a lot of people for whom the discussion about whether it makes more sense to take a purist or a pragmatic approach to lowering the abortion rate makes them think about things in different ways, makes them question whether the Republican approach really has been the best pro-life strategy. And just even raising those questions, you don't have to change people's minds. You just have to get them willing to engage the possibility that there are progressive approaches that meet their concerns. And I think that's proving useful.
Might I get an opportunity to ask about, I think it's one of the elements that doesn't seem to be in the room, but maybe I came through this place, so maybe I missed the way of defining the thought. But the missing is Islam. It's growing faster. It's, you mentioned Africa. It's all over Africa. It's been for a long time. That's growing. It's becoming a major competitor. We look at American prisons, look at the American streets, and the demographics. So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And 2000 was a very interesting year to see the political activity particularly in the Muslim community in the U.S., that there was so much voter registration that went on and really got a lot of Muslim voters engaged in the process for the first time. And it largely benefited the Bush campaign.